In the frozen silence of northern Ontario lies Coldwater Creek, a town untouched by time, until one winter morning shattered its peace forever. Lydia Warren vanished without a trace, leaving behind a running car, a trail of footprints that stopped mid-snow, and a mystery that would soon uncover a buried past. Decades earlier, William Harker disappeared in the same woods after claiming to find something worth dying for. When Lydia's belongings were discovered beside Harker's remains, the town realized their stories were terrifyingly connected. Two lives, two disappearances, one forest that refuses to forget. This is the Coldwater Creek mystery. Coldwater Creek was the kind of town that time forgot. A cluster of wooden houses surrounded by tall pine trees, icy rivers, and winding back roads that disappeared into the wilderness. Everyone knew everyone. Neighbors still shoveled each other's driveways, kids played hockey on frozen ponds, and the post office doubled as the local gossip center. It was peaceful, predictable, and safe. That's why Lydia Warren's disappearance didn't just shock the town, it shattered its sense of security. Lydia was a familiar face in Coldwater Creek. She worked at the local library, smiled at strangers, and volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend. She wasn't the kind of person to vanish. On the morning of February 3, 1999, she stopped by the grocery store, picked up a few items, and called her sister to say she'd be home for dinner. That was the last anyone heard from her. By sunset, her car was discovered on a narrow logging road just outside town. The scene was strange from the start. The car was still running, headlights cutting through the falling snow. The driver's door was open, the seatbelt unbuckled. Inside were her purse, her keys, a bag of groceries, and a coffee cup still half full. Nothing was missing, nothing out of place, except Lydia. Officers followed a single trail of footprints leading away from the car. They stopped abruptly 20 feet later, as though the person who made them had simply vanished into the thin, freezing air. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no drag marks. The snow was fresh and undisturbed. Search dogs arrived within the hour, but they couldn't follow her scent past the point where the tracks ended. It was like chasing a ghost. The police organized search teams, and for the next week, dozens of volunteers combed through the surrounding woods. Helicopters scanned from above while divers checked the frozen river nearby, breaking through sheets of ice. Nothing was found. It was as if Lydia had stepped into another world. In small towns like Coldwater Creek, mystery spreads faster than truth. Some people believed she'd been kidnapped by someone she knew. Others thought she might have wandered into the forest and gotten lost in a snowstorm. But none of that explained the footprints that stopped mid-path. Rumors started to take on darker shapes. A few residents claimed they'd seen strange lights flickering in the trees the night before she went missing. Others spoke of a figure standing near the old bridge long after midnight, watching the road. Police called it an ongoing investigation, but the town quietly accepted what many feared. They might never find her. Lydia's family left flowers by the roadside, but week after week the snow kept falling, covering everything in silence. By spring, the only thing left at the site was a faded missing poster flapping against a telephone pole. For most people, the case was a tragedy. But for some, especially those who lived near the forest's edge, it felt like something else entirely. Something older, something waiting. 2 weeks after Lydia's disappearance, Coldwater Creek was beginning to sink back into its old rhythm. The search parties had ended, and the police presence had thinned out. Most people assumed she was gone for good, lost to the winter or taken by someone who'd never be found. Then, one cold morning, a hiker named Evan McNeil stumbled across something that changed everything. Deep in the woods, far from any known trail, he found a small cabin half buried in snow. It looked abandoned at first glance, its windows fogged over and roof sagging beneath layers of ice. But when he peered through the window, he saw a lamp still standing upright on the table, and a faint smell of burnt oil drifting through the cracks. When investigators arrived, they realized the cabin wasn't on any official map. It didn't belong to any registered landowner. The door was unlocked, and inside was a scene that made their skin crawl. The place was tidy, not the chaotic mess of a squatter's hideout. On the table sat a neatly folded blanket, a tin of tea, and a notebook. The handwriting in that notebook was unmistakable. It belonged to Lydia Warren. The first few pages were normal. She wrote about her daily routines, her favorite books, and errands she had to run. But then the tone began to shift. The entries became shorter, more frantic. She wrote about hearing someone outside at night, the crunch of boots in the snow, the sound of someone breathing near the walls. She mentioned seeing shadows move when the wind was still, and lights glowing deep between the trees when there shouldn't have been any. Each entry ended with the same phrase, "He's closer now." The final page was dated February 2nd, one day before she vanished. The last words written were, "I know he's watching me. I can feel it when I close my eyes." The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. Forensic teams scoured the cabin but found no signs of struggle, no fingerprints besides Lydia's, and no tracks leading in or out except those of the hiker who discovered it. But one thing stood out. A single photograph pinned to the wall above the bed. It showed a man standing in a field, his face scratched out with a sharp object. The back of the photo was marked with 2 letters, WH. The photograph looked old, decades older than Lydia's time. When police ran it through missing persons archives, they discovered something unsettling. The image matched an unsolved case from 1972. A man named William Harker who had vanished in the same forest nearly 30 years earlier. What was Lydia doing with his photo? Why had she built or found a cabin connected to a man who disappeared decades before she was even born? As investigators packed up the evidence, a few officers noticed something strange. Despite the cold, the oil lamp's wick was still slightly warm. Someone had been there recently. Whether it was Lydia or the person she wrote about, no one could say. But for the first time it seemed her disappearance was more than a simple missing persons case. Something darker was unfolding in those frozen woods. The photo of the man with the scratched-out eyes became the centerpiece of the investigation. For weeks, police tried to uncover who he was and why Lydia had his picture pinned in that hidden cabin. When forensic experts restored part of the damaged image, they identified him as William Harker, a construction worker who vanished in 1972 while helping build a dam project not far from Coldwater Creek. His disappearance had never been solved, and over the years his name had faded into local folklore. Some said he drowned in the river after drinking on the job, while others whispered that he'd run away after finding something valuable in the woods. The case had gone cold decades ago, but now it was suddenly alive again. Detectives began combing through the old files from the Harker investigation. His last known statement to his supervisor was strange. He had claimed to discover something buried in the forest, something he planned to dig up and sell. No one ever found out what it was, and a week later, he vanished. At the time, search teams had scoured the same forest where Lydia's cabin now stood, but came back empty-handed. It was as if the woods themselves refused to give up their secrets. When modern forensic teams returned to that same area in 1999, guided by the clues from Lydia's journal, they brought ground-penetrating radar and excavation tools. Near the cabin, they discovered a shallow pit covered with frozen soil. What lay beneath was worse than anyone expected. The remains of a man were buried in a curled position, his bones fractured, his clothing torn but still partly intact. Nearby, there were fragments of rusted metal and a piece of fabric matching the uniform from the 1972 construction project. DNA testing confirmed what the detectives already feared. It was William Harker. The find should have closed one mystery, but it only opened another. Because beside Harker's body, buried just a few inches away, was something that didn't belong there. A woman's shoe. Not an old one, not from the 70s, but modern, pristine, and unmistakably the same kind Lydia Warren had been wearing the day she vanished. The discovery sent shockwaves through the entire province. News outlets picked up the story, calling it the Coldwater Connection. How could a woman missing for weeks be linked to a man dead for nearly 30 years? The timelines didn't add up. There was no rational way the two could have crossed paths, and yet their belongings, their stories, and their fates seemed bound together in the frozen earth. Investigators kept digging for answers, but every new lead led them in circles. Some theorized that Lydia might have stumbled upon Harker's burial site and met the same fate. Others believed she was researching the old case herself, perhaps discovering something she shouldn't have. But there were also those who thought something far stranger was happening, something beyond the reach of ordinary explanation. By spring, the snow began to melt, but the forest remained heavy with silence. Birds avoided the clearing where Harker was found, and even the search teams admitted a feeling of being watched while working there. The two stories, one from 1972 and one from 1999, had finally merged, and Coldwater Creek was no longer just a quiet northern town. It had become the setting for a mystery that refused to stay buried. When the connection between Lydia Warren and William Harker made national headlines, Coldwater Creek became overrun with curiosity seekers, reporters, and amateur ghost hunters. Yet despite all the noise, the police investigation continued quietly in the background. They revisited every piece of evidence, searching for a timeline that made sense. Then, nearly 2 months after Lydia's disappearance, a grainy surveillance tape surfaced from a gas station 15 miles south of town. It was dated February 2, 1999, the night before she vanished. The footage showed Lydia in her red winter coat, calmly filling her car with gas. She appeared relaxed, even smiled at the cashier. But then, near the edge of the camera's frame, a man stood watching her. He wore a dark parka and heavy boots, his face hidden by the hood. When Lydia drove away, he followed her out of the parking lot. Investigators attempted to enhance the video, but every effort made the image worse. The man's face blurred with static lines, and each time technicians adjusted the contrast, the footage seemed to degrade further, as though it was resisting clarity. The gas station's original security tapes were also corrupted, the magnetic film partially erased by an unknown interference. It was the first and only time such damage had occurred with that system. Detectives used the timestamp to reconstruct Lydia's last hours. She left the gas station at 9:42 p.m. and should have reached home by 10:10. But her car wasn't found until nearly 12 hours later, idling on that deserted logging road. Somewhere between those 2 points, Lydia vanished, and no one knew where she went or why. Her wristwatch, later recovered in a patch of snow miles from the scene, offered another puzzle. It had stopped at exactly 3:14 a.m., several hours after investigators believed she disappeared. The watch was intact, with no sign of damage or water exposure. Experts could not explain how or why it had stopped at that specific moment. As police expanded their search radius, strange reports began trickling in. A truck driver claimed he'd seen a woman standing by the roadside that same night, barefoot, wearing a red coat. Another man camping near the woods said he heard crying around dawn, followed by a voice whispering, "He's still here." When officers checked those locations, they found no footprints, no trace of anyone ever being there. By late March, even the most skeptical detectives started admitting that the case was beyond ordinary logic. Phone lines at the local police station occasionally picked up faint static, followed by a woman's voice saying phrases that matched lines from Lydia's journal. One call reportedly came from Lydia's own disconnected number. The technician who traced it claimed the signal originated from inside the forest. Whether it was coincidence, a technical glitch, or something else entirely, no one could prove. The case was officially classified as unsolved, but every officer who had worked it carried the same uneasy feeling, that somewhere in those woods, the story wasn't finished. Something unseen was still repeating itself, as if the past and present were caught in a loop that refused to break. By the spring of 2001, most people in Coldwater Creek had tried to move on. Lydia Warren had been missing for 2 years, and her name had become more of a ghost story than a real memory. Parents used it to warn their children not to wander into the forest after dark. The police case file sat on a shelf gathering dust, reopened only when a new rumor or anonymous tip surfaced. But one day, when the frozen lake began to thaw, everything changed again. A fisherman named Dale Murdoch was cutting through the last layer of ice on Coldwater Creek when his hook snagged something solid. He thought it was an old box or piece of metal debris, but when he hauled it up, what he saw made him drop his tools. It was a rusted metal container sealed shut with wire, covered in decades of grime and frozen mud. When authorities pried it open, they found 2 leather wallets and a strip of undeveloped film rolled tightly inside a waterproof pouch. One wallet belonged to Lydia Warren. The other, unbelievably, was William Harker's. Both contained identification cards and photographs in perfect condition, as if they had been protected from the elements all this time. The discovery reignited the case instantly. How could 2 people separated by nearly 30 years end up inside the same box beneath the ice? The real shock came when the film was developed. There were 5 photos in total. The first 4 seemed ordinary: shots of the forest, the frozen creek, and what looked like a dirt trail leading toward a clearing. But the final photo silenced everyone in the darkroom. It showed a woman standing beside a man, both staring directly into the camera. The woman was Lydia Warren. The man beside her matched William Harker's face from his 1972 employment file. The photo was black and white, clearly old, and when experts examined the negatives, they confirmed the film stock was from the early 1970s. That meant the image was taken at least 20 years before Lydia was born. The film went through multiple rounds of testing. Forensic experts tried to disprove it, calling it a double exposure or a fabrication, but no evidence of tampering was ever found. The emulsion, chemical structure, and wear on the negatives were consistent with genuine aging. It wasn't edited. It wasn't fake. Somehow, Lydia appeared in a photograph taken decades before her existence. That final piece of evidence changed everything, and nothing. There were no new suspects, no clear explanations, only more confusion. The official report eventually labeled the incident as Unexplained Evidence Anomaly. After that, the case was closed quietly, sealed under restricted access. Today, the cabin has collapsed, the forest has reclaimed the land, and Coldwater Creek has returned to uneasy silence. But locals still tell stories. Some claim they've seen faint lights near the old logging road on winter nights. Others say they've heard a woman calling softly for help, her voice echoing through the trees. And every few years, when the lake freezes over, someone swears they see 2 figures standing on the ice, one in a red coat, the other in work boots, both staring up at the dark woods as if waiting for the story to begin again. The mystery of Coldwater Creek remains one of the strangest and most chilling stories in Canadian true crime history. Lydia Warren's disappearance, the rediscovery of William Harker's remains, and the photograph that defied time, all point to a truth that no one can fully explain. Some believe the forest hides answers we're not meant to find, while others think the story has only just begun. If this case left you questioning what's real and what's hidden in the shadows, don't stop here. Spoilers, subscribe for episode 2 of Canada's Most Bizarre Murder Mysteries, where another chilling story unfolds. Like, comment, and share your theory below. Could Lydia and William still be connected beyond time?